Welcome to today's Religion Media Centre briefing, which is on a National Churches Trust survey on the state of Britain's churches. And it shows how the situation has changed over the past 15 years and outlines the challenges in tackling the issue of decaying buildings. We're joined by many guests to tell this story, and I'm just going to introduce you all at the beginning. Sir Philip Rutnam, Chair of the National Churches Trust. Carl Newton, Deputy CEO of the National Churches Trust. Lachlan Rolanda of Whitestone Insight, which conducted the research. Professor Kate Giles from the Centre for the Study of Christianity and Culture at the University of York. Diana Evans, Head of Places of Worship at Historic England. And representatives from Bethesda Chapel in Mould, Hugh Powell Davis, and St Grada and Holy Cross Church in Cornwall. I know we have Mary Keeley, and we may have several others on the call as well. So thank you all very much for joining. We're going to start with Carl Newton and Lachlan Rolanda of Whitestone Insight. I'd like to ask you, first of all, to walk us through the actual survey and the information that you found. And Lachlan, perhaps I can start with you. Can you tell us how many people were surveyed, when this survey was done, and what proportion of answers did you get as regarding the whole of the number of churches in the UK? So, first question, how many people did you actually get responses from in your survey?
Yeah, thanks so much. So we surveyed 3,628 churches. And we surveyed them between May and July this year. And that proportion was taken and we were able to weight that so that it was representative of the nation's churches as a whole. So we weighted the data to rurality, so whether or not these churches were in urban, suburban or rural settings. We weighted to listed status, denomination, and then congregation size as well. So this is a very representative survey of the nation's churches.
I read somewhere that there are 38,500 churches, an estimate of churches in the UK. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's about 10%.
This would be 3,600 out of that number. Thanks very much for that information. And moving to you, Carl Newton from the National Churches Trust. This is a similar survey to one conducted 15 years ago, if I'm right. Can you explain why this was undertaken now and why there was a gap of 15 years?
Yeah, I can. And just first, though, following on from what Lachlan was saying, just a thank you to every single church that participated in completing that survey. The reason that we're able to talk about the results of these surveys because people took the time to fill it in, and that's really greatly appreciated. There's lots of pressures on time, lots of pressures on volunteers, which we'll come on to. So that was a really significant thing, and also we received support from Yeoman's Ecclesiastical Insurance and the University of York to help us. Publicise and put the survey together.
Several boxes ticked there then, Carl. So why has this not been done for 15 years?
Well, what we noticed was this is a difficult time for churches. There's lots of pressures that they've been put under, and there was a great need for their support. We'd used a lot of the 2010 survey, and we'd found it to be very informative in some of the work that we've been doing. But what we wanted to do was have an accurate picture of the situation that churches faced. We know, as I said, that they're under pressure. We also know that if you look, they lack support potentially in the kind of wider political environment. So what we wanted to do was better understand the challenges that they are facing, to be able to properly celebrate all of the wonderful things that they do, and to present it to the wider public in a way that is data-driven and evidence-based.
One of your key findings was that 1 in 20 churches believe that they will not be a place of worship in 5 years' time. Were you surprised at that response?
I was, and I wasn't. We know that there are lots of pressures, for instance, in Scotland, and we know some of the similar pressures are going on in Wales. So I wasn't surprised that there was a figure of that size. The key thing for me is the 5 years time aspect to it. In a heritage context and a church context, 5 years time is effectively the blink of an eye. So I think that is a surprising figure and a shocking figure in many ways, having something that significant.
Did your survey indicate whether it was due to falling congregations or to decaying buildings?
When we look at it, one of the things we have that you better see in the full report is we put together a thing around the web of resilience, and I think that shows that it's a series of interconnected issues. We think the building is very important as part of that, and there's a fantastic diagram in the full report which will be coming out shortly, which shows a deteriorating building can have a big effect on volunteers and community support. So if there is a single cause, it may well be around the building, but I don't think it's correct to look at a single kind of issue. It can be around worship, it can be around volunteering, it can be around financing.
Lachlan, can I ask you about another interesting finding, which was the problems with roofs and guttering? And the statistic there is that 1 in 10 will need urgent repairs in the next 12 months. And it was said at the briefing that each repair is around about £250,000. Can you just explain to us the changing picture that your survey showed from the last 15 years? Because the situation has become worse in that time.
That's absolutely right. And as Carl says, all these problems are interconnected. We found that, so as you said, 10% of churches surveyed indicated that they needed an urgent, their roofs are facing urgent need for repair. And that was the same figure for the rainwater goods, so guttering and things like that. Those figures were up from the 2010 report. So in 2010, 6% of churches said that their roofs were requiring urgent repairs, and 7% said that their gutters required urgent repairs. So both up to 10% 15 years later indicates, again, feeds into that question we were discussing earlier in terms of where churches see themselves going in 5 years hence. And really the point is this is an interconnected issue, and that as one area of church life deteriorates, others follow. And so that's why it's crucial that churches get the support they need on this.
Did you find out anything about the age of the churches that experience these problems? Are they all Victorian churches?
It tends to be listed churches and rural churches. And again, actually, it was the listed churches and the rural churches which were the more pessimistic in terms of the fear for the future. So whereas 5% of churches anticipated not being open in 5 years' time, when you segregated that down to just looking at the rural churches, that figure increased to 7%. So yeah, it's definitely an issue which faces the older and more rural church buildings.
Thank you. I'm going back to you, Carl. Another set of questions on the way that churches are used. You asked about whether they had weekly services. You found 80% had weekly services. More than half were used by organisations at least once a week. How has that changed over the last 15 years? Mention was made at the conference that there was something called the Taylor Review in 2017 that encouraged churches to open themselves up to communities. Is the finding in your survey an indication that people have, read it and taken note of it and done something about it? Is that the conclusion we could reach?
To answer that question properly, what we've done with this set of data regarding looking at the 2025 report, we haven't directly yet compared back those figures around open and community use. I think we could see observably that there are more activities that are taking place within churches. But one of the things that we'll be looking to do following this report is to do some more work looking in particular at the community side of things to see how substantially have these figures changed.
So a question to you and Lachlan. What did the report show about how the repairs are funded? When you ask questions about how the churches got their money, together?
There's a couple of points there to make, really. One of the things that was significant is the reliance on local funding. If you look at the top three areas that churches go to for funding for repairs, it's local people, it's local events like jumble sales, it's legacies, which would be from local people. What we have is a situation where churches, which are a national asset, are funded by their local congregation, the local people in their area. And what we can see by looking back at the 2010 results is that level of engagement has increased. So churches are trying very hard to fundraise from local people for their support.
That's a good place to bring in Sir Philip Rutnam, who is the chair of the National Churches Trust. So we've heard of a lack of support from politicians towards the upkeep of churches there. Does that resonate with you? Do you agree?
Well, actually, it's very interesting. I think if you look at the recent debates there have been in Parliament about the future of our church buildings, there's been very keen interest from a large number of constituency MPs who, from all parties, in fact, who tend to see directly the role these buildings play in their communities, the role they play in providing a focal point, centre of identity for countless communities, small, rural, large, urban, across the country, and also the role they play in the life of communities in providing a shelter for people who may be suffering from some kind of addiction or distress, or role in food banks. So constituency MPs, my observation, they would seem to get it. I think, in truth, if we look at what government has been doing, so at the political level of ministers and the decisions they've been making, I think it's not been as positive as I would have liked. Let's just put it like that. So we've had a system of refunds for VAT costs incurred by churches in place now for many, many years. It's called the Listed Places of Worship Grant Scheme, but actually what it does is refund the cost of VAT on historic places of worship, listed places of worship, not just churches, synagogues, mosques, temples. And that's been in place for many years, but it is at the moment, this government has introduced, first of all, a cap on the amount of refunds of £25,000, which is a new cap. And £25,000 doesn't go very far if what you're faced with is a major repair to the roof or tower or stonework. And secondly, we only know that the scheme is running to March 2026 at the moment. Not as positive as I would have liked. I could go on, but there's a bit of a mismatch, I think, between constituency MPs who, on the whole, seem to get it, and the level of ministers.
So what does that indicate to you, that the government doesn't take the upkeep of church buildings seriously?
Well, I think you could interpret it in a number of ways. The government's obviously facing lots of different pressures. It's a new government. Public finances are constrained. What it suggests to me is that the government, for whatever reason, doesn't quite get that we have half the country's most important historic buildings playing the role that I've described, and a vital part of the country's social infrastructure, all run basically by volunteers at no cost to the state. And it is seriously at risk, very, very seriously at risk. There is a crisis unfolding before our eyes affecting these buildings. And at the moment, I don't think the government seems to get that.
Your message at the conference was that it is an urgent issue, and that you want to see groups work better with each other, to collaborate, more liaison. Can you explain your vision there and how you think this will work?
This is not a straightforward issue, because it's, as Carl and Lachlan already explained, lots of interconnected issues. But fundamentally, simplify it. The solution to each of these buildings, the solution can actually only really be worked out locally. It depends on local people, local volunteers, local priests, local communities, local councils. It has to be worked out locally. And the buildings are very varied in all sorts of ways. But in order for that to happen, you need the right kind of national frameworks, the right kind of national support. There are things that only national institutions can do. And the national institutions need to recognize that this is a very serious issue. They need to get onto it, and they need to focus on the things that they really can only do. And there are two things I'd call out at national level. One is funding for major repairs. Listed places of worship scheme is important for major repairs, but it's also important just for the continued running of the buildings, the everyday maintenance and repair costs. You also have a really big issue when you have major repair costs, like a new roof or a new tower, a sort of once in a generation challenge. And at the moment, all the burden of finding the money for that rests with local people who have to write grant applications. So one thing nationally we need is a capital funding scheme. Government has a role there. I think philanthropy could have a role. I do think some of the denominations potentially with their asset base could also have a role, but we need easier access to prompt capital funding. The second thing is we need more support for volunteers, because they are the people who make these things happen. And at the moment, let's just say there's a lot of burden on volunteers and not necessarily that much support. We need to change the balance. We need more support from denominations nationally and at diocesan level, regional level, if you like, to help support volunteers. So those are the things I'd want to see at national level: capital funding, more support and recognition for volunteers. You then need the solutions to be worked out locally. And in truth, the solutions locally typically involve getting more people into the building, making the building as open, as usable as possible, having worship continuing to be the center, but a wide range of uses as well can exist alongside worship, not in all denominations, but in many.
And what is the role of the National Churches Trust here? Will you be the group that pushes this collaboration forward?
We have several roles. One of our roles is we are proud to be a grant funder. We managed to raise enough funding from different sources. We're not a rich organization. We have members, we have donors, and we have supporters, and we managed to raise enough to give about £3 million a year in grant funding, which is an important source when you're at the other end of the telescope. Being given a grant of 10, 20, 30,000 pounds is a really, really valuable contribution. And that's one role we have. That's really important for us. But I think we also have a role as an independent charity. We're actually not a faith organization. We believe profoundly in these buildings and their importance. An independent charity which is advocating for them, speaking up for them, speaking up for the people who love them and look after them, and coming up pressing for solutions. We can't deliver the solutions ourselves. We can only promote solutions. And that does involve getting the likes of the government, ministers, other members of parliament in opposition front bench, for example, to pay attention to this. It does involve also the leadership of denominations. Go back to my point about their role in creating the right climate for the right environment for these buildings to thrive.
If this is going to be a new collaboration at a new level, don't you need another organisation to be the facilitator to bring the organisations like yours together?
Well, possibly, but I'd observe that actually this is already quite a crowded field organisationally. There are a lot of organisations involved. When you add them all up at national level, as well as the National Churches Trust, there are fantastic organisations like Friends of Friendless Churches, Churches Conservation Trust, which look after buildings which have essentially closed, no longer being used actively for worship. There are the county trusts. It's a very complicated organisational field. I would be, as somebody who's worked around organisations for a long time, I would be wary of saying the answer is to create another organisation. I think we've got enough organisations. I think the key to this is the people who work in them, the people who have leadership roles in them, recognising they have a vital job, an urgent job to create the right environment for these local buildings to thrive. That, to be honest, doesn't need a new organisation. It needs a better conversation.
Thank you. I'm going to now move to Diana Evans, who is Head of Places of Worship at Historic England, one of the other organisations you've just been referring to there, Philip. Diana, thank you for joining the call. Your organisation was represented at the conference yesterday with a presentation where Ian Morrison talked about how he viewed this issue about saving church buildings. And he said, it's not just about money, it's about awareness. Can you unpack that for us and tell us what he meant, please?
Well, we've been doing certain research projects, partly as part of the DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport research programme into cultural capital. And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to understand what people who are not members of congregations understand about their relationship to places of worship. And one of the things we have found is that people in general have no idea how places of worship are funded and resourced. They assume that somebody does it, that great unknown mythical money monster in somewhere. If pushed, they might say they assume it's the local council, or that it is a denominational body, or that it's English Heritage or National Trust, or they come up with a whole range of national bodies. But only in a recent poll that we did, which was representative of the whole population, only 11% of people realised that it was up to the congregation and local people to keep a local building going.
He seemed to suggest that what was needed, well, he said this, was a huge, huge public relations challenge. So is he indicating that the answer to all of this is just more PR, more communications, people telling their stories?
He was very strongly of the view that we should all, at local and national level, be telling our story, better stories, in a better way to communicate them. I don't think he's necessarily saying we want a major social media campaign and, click here to donate 10 pence or something. We're not talking at that level, but it is, if you like, a cultural change. Most of the volunteers, as many will be on this call, who do their work really, really hard, but they are very, very modest. They are not the kind of people who make a big song and dance about what's been achieved. And I think there needs to be a way of telling the story of the building, which in some cases is over hundreds of years, but also telling the story of what's been achieved in the last 5 years, the last year, and being proud that you've managed to do one side of a building's roof, because that is an achievement. There may be 4 other roofs that need repairing just as badly, but to celebrate and to be very public about where the resources for that came from, I think begins to change the cultural understanding that if you want the building there for a Christingle at Christmas or a harvest in the autumn, for you to go and use locally, then local people have a part to play, both in helping to do those things and also to resource them.
Now, you were in historic England, dealing with all kinds of different buildings. What is it that makes churches so different, do you think, in the public's imagination, and perhaps precludes them or stops them from giving money to churches that they might give to a monument, for example, or a castle somewhere?
I think that churches and other historic places of worship are buildings that are, by their very nature, they're part of the stability, they're part of the core. Often they shape the place that they represent. They're landmarks, they're very public. You can see them from the motorway as you drive home, and you can walk past them very easily on a high street. And so they are, if you like, so familiar and so perpetual in people's consciousness that they don't get noticed. They are taken for granted, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And so I think to help a broader part of the population to understand that their help is needed. They may not want to worship regularly, or they may not want to go to some of the social facilities that are on offer, but their help is needed if they're going to see that spire when they turn off the motorway and feel nearly home, my place, or if they are going to be able to go in and buy their Christmas cards there in the course of the next few weeks.
Thank you, Dana. We're going to meet some of the people you wonderfully described as modest, who are the volunteers, the backbone of the local communities, making these churches continue to stand up. And so we're joined by Hugh Powell-Davis, who's the pastor of Capel Bethesda, which is a Welsh Presbyterian church in Mold, Flintshire, North Wales. And I don't know if there's anyone else from Capel Bethesda on the call, but do indicate we'll have you joining in as well. And also we have some representatives from St Grada and Holy Cross Church on the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall. So I know we have Mary Keeley. I think you've got Sheila Stevens on the call as well. And again, if you're from that church, just indicate in the chat box and we'll make sure that we bring your picture up as well. So I'm going to start with you, Hugh. You're the pastor of Capel Bethesda. And from all the pictures, it looks a magnificent building. It's pillars on the front, fantastic interior. Do you have an active congregation there? How many people worship there? Is it still alive?
We're still alive, yes. Although diminished after the pandemic somewhat, but started a new work with families also, which is growing. So the traditional congregation, let's say, down to one service now every Sunday, is about 30, and the families service is somewhat similar.
You were open to the public during the week. What kind of community activities do you put on there? It says in the blurb here that you had an essential role in the promotion of the Welsh language from when you began in the 19th century. So, for example, do you have Welsh classes in your church? What goes on there during the week?
The Welsh nonconformist chapels have been the backbone of promoting the use of the Welsh language and fostering it over many centuries. We're entwined somewhat, intricately entwined, as it were. But choirs, other groups, it's more or less a matter of who wants to use our building and who will support us in that also. So it's open to many groups, elderly people, the women's group, Welsh women's group, literary groups, especially mother and toddler Welsh groups, which we have 2 of during the week also.
Now, tell us, what is the issue with your building? What repairs do you need to make to it, and how much will it cost?
It was like the Forth Bridge, really. It was built. This building, present building, was built between 1863 and 1864, without maintenance issues in mind. I don't think. As in medieval churches, you can get to every piece of it. You can't get to every piece of this. That I think that the mentality really in the height of Victorian building era was we'll throw these places up, and in about 50 years we'll have to take them down again and rebuild them. But of course we still have them 150 and 170 years later. At the moment, the facade, which is very, very ornate, has been leaking seriously, and we're having work done on that. Your previous contributor mentioned we need to celebrate. We do. We did half the windows during the pandemic. We did the ceiling inside, which allowed us to keep on using the building safely. We need to do the other half of the windows. We need to get the place watertight. And we're doing this now quickly, perhaps thinking that the listed places of worship grant scheme might come to an end in next March. We don't know whether it's going to progress after that. So we need to do as much as we can and collect as much money as we can from various sources, which are not, forthcoming now in this time. Really, there's much to do.
How does it feel to you as a pastor to be responsible and spend most of your time or a lot of your time keeping up a building instead of praying with people?
You've hit a nail, not the nail, but a nail on its head there. Really, it's always, and it always needs to be balanced. I can't be spending my time doing this. We're very grateful for those volunteers that we have, but we're aware that there's, working with volunteers, having always been working with volunteers as the only, perhaps in many situations, the only paid person, or the person that gets acknowledged monetarily. Really, you have to be mindful of the volunteers' time, really, and knowing that many of them give hours and hours and hours every week towards maintenance and actual running of the building, welcoming people in and liaising with different groups, etc. So it is a balance, and it's something we're having to face at the moment as well. There was talk of 5 years. This is, at grassroots. What does 5 years look like? Where do we need to be in 5 years? Really, we're discussing offloading the building to an outside organization which we would set up in order that we then could avail ourselves of some more grant funding, which might be available if we had another CIO. We need partners in the work, and it's, I've got a meeting with potential partners tomorrow. Which, as you mentioned, it is all taking time and needs to be supported. And we have, we are instilling this to the leaders of our denomination as well, that we do need this support locally.
So, in your denomination, there are chapels closing all over Wales. We heard right at the beginning of this, and in Scotland. Do you think the church has to face a future of organising itself outside the buildings? Is your pattern that you've just described as selling off the building going to be the only way that these buildings can survive?
What we see, really, we had a buildings conference, Presbyterian Church of Wales organised buildings conference in April this year, to take this issue seriously, to bring some ideas to the table, and to hear what people are doing locally. Selling the building, it doesn't solve the problem of the building being used, and it might be an eyesore in that community for another generation. Really, the actual funding to do that building up, is not forthcoming in rural areas either. So it's either the church or, relinquishing. We're not getting massive funds from the sale of these buildings, but yet again, the sale does fund ministry and mission also, and we are relying to too much of an extent on that sale of buildings as well. But it's, I think, one of the results of the conference that we had was to see these buildings as the asset that they are in their own communities. And as one of your contributors mentioned also, that the answer lies locally in partnerships and in getting people into these buildings and being creative, but that needs to be supported on many different levels, and especially here in Wales. We're not in a particularly Welsh area in terms of percentage of Welsh speakers, but we're in Wales. Yeah, we are. We have that issue also to contend with.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. And we're going to Cornwall now. And we have Sheila Stevens, church warden, and we have Mary Keeley from the Friends Association with someone next to you. Not quite sure who that is. But anyway, Friends of the Church. Sheila, I'll start with you, perhaps. You've been hearing the story of the pastor in the church in Wales. Tell us about the issues that you have with your church. It's beautiful. It's pictured in all the publicity from the National Churches Trust. Built in 1864 on a site that's had a Christian presence since 1261. Sheila, just tell us what the issues are with the building.
Yes.
And what you've had to look at for repairs.
The issues are that it needs a new roof, basically, badly. It needs a new roof. We've patched it every winter. We're very exposed. There's a lot of storm damage. It needs work inside. The tower itself is 12th century, I think. And the building, as you say, was rebuilt in Victorian times, early Victorian. But it just needs help, and there's no electricity there. But it's Grade 1 listed, so we have to do it. And we've fundraised a huge amount of money, and not myself. I'm church warden of the parish, and we have 3 churches in our parish. It's not our parish church. We use it once a month for sung evensong. It's used. It has a Christingle at Christmas and. Harvest Festival, we use it on Remembrance for another service, etc. It's very popular with weddings, picturesque, as you say, and a lot of people walk. It's on a walking route, really. A lot of visitors visit, many hundreds actually during the summer. So we do need to preserve it. It's also a very sacred spot. It was found by the saint in the 7th century, and it is a very sacred spot. We want to preserve it.
Thank you. Let's move to Mary Keeley and the Friends of the Church who've been raising the money. What happened, Mary? How did you get involved? Was there a community meeting when the notice came that the roof needed to be repaired? What happened?
Well, as Sheila said, there are actually 3 churches, but we were really involved with the 2 oldest churches, St. Grade and St. Ruan. And it was actually St. Ruan that was the centre of attention at first. But then we realised we've got a huge project up at St. Grade. So we were sort of co-opted, willingly or unwillingly, I think. And then our remit has grown over the years. So that I'd say we were fundraising for St. Grade 5 years, Brian.
Yes.
5 years. And we've raised £182,000. And we're a small community of 1,000 who live here. I mean, obviously it swells in the summer with holidaymakers. We're almost a tourist church in some ways, that people are, on the walking routes. And people, although we haven't got any electricity, we've managed to install a battery-operated collecting card reader. And so we're getting donations that way. When we set up, we had a subscription, a membership, and that's proved very useful over the years to, really to keep us just running as a fundraising group. And we have had to, my husband and I, Brian is the treasurer. We're spending, I should think, 2 to 3 days a week on this project at the moment. We have had a lot of support from the diocese. There's a building support officer who helps us, Faye Edwards. And we have had to reach out to all the groups, including Historic England. National Churches Trust have given us very big grants last year and also raised the profile. So the listed places of worship scheme that we know is in danger has actually put us in the spotlight. So National Churches Trust came down and did a video of us. And we also had BBC Spotlight send one of their reporters along, and we did some more filming, which was put out on local TV. So, it's a big job.
Right. And I wanted to ask what experience you had in fundraising and where you began.
I'm actually was in the NHS, but I did have some experience of fundraising for a very large hospice about 20 years ago. It might be 30 years now. So a little bit of experience with two academics, two professors, and they're used to applying for funding through their university, for research, but they're both retired. And then we've got, well, Sally's just wonderful. She used to be a solicitor, and but there's only 5 of us really doing all this fundraising.
How did you find each other? Did you knock on the doors? Did you meet in the pub? What happened?
Well, it's a small community. We all knew each other already, really.
Yes.
So we've drawn on local expertise that we knew existed, really.
And what the other professor is on the PCC. So we've tried to keep, the links with the PCC, because in the end it'll be their project, if you like. It's just we're doing all the fundraising. So we're very grateful to the relationship we have.
Why does the community want the church building to keep going? What does it say? What do they say to you?
They say, we must save that church. It's been there for generations. We can't let it go. They say, oh, we had all the weddings there. We've had the wedding. But all my relatives are buried there, and we can't let it go. But it's a sadness that it's in such a state, because it's not comfortable for people to go to the events. We have to stage anything in the better weather. Can't do much in the winter. And they just want to see it, back to where it is and where it should be and be comfortable, because it's water ingression, it's terrible. The tower's full of marvellous foliage inside. So everybody wants to see it, somewhere where you can feel the joy. The wedding situation is marvellous. We haven't actually had one this year, but I know somebody is really hoping it will be usable next year, so... And the brides love it, but they have to have wellies as well.
It's also got acoustics, and it's very. We have staged musical events there, but that would be a big ambition of ours to turn it into a much more regular venue for music.
So, being Cornish, we had a sea shanty festival, and we had pasty and hymns to raise the money to help towards.
If there were to be a government minister on the call, and I asked them, and they didn't even give a statement, but if a government minister were here on the call, what would you say to them about the grants that only run until March and may be withdrawn?
That is absolutely desperate for us, frankly. I mean, given the amount of money that we have as a target for the full renovation, we would lose getting on for 100,000. If the listed places worship scheme, if it was totally removed, and we no longer even had the 25,000, it would be over 100,000 that we'd lost. So it's a colossal impact on our fundraising. It has actually totally thrown our plans out, because we had, as was previously referred to by the pastor from Wales, that that we desperately wanted to get some of the work underway before next March, when that scheme could possibly be wound up. So it's thrown our plans out. We've had to change tack. We had originally intended to approach this as a 2-phase project, with the roof being done first, which had all kinds of drawbacks anyway. But this is knocked a hole completely in that one, and made us realise that we have to go for the whole funding of the project in one go. And we are underway with approaches to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for that. So that's what we would say. Yes, certainly.
Thank you. Professor Kate Giles, I'd like to bring you in at this point. You're Director of the Centre for the Study of Christianity and Culture at the University of York. I just would like you to reflect on some of the things that have been said in the course of this discussion, picking up that last point first, and the desperate need for volunteers working with the churches to raise the money to keep the buildings going. What representations are you making from your centre, if any, if that's your role, to the government to secure the future of church buildings?
Thank you so much. Yes, well, there has been a national survey, in fact, from DCMS themselves, inviting churches to respond to the proposals around listed places of worship. And many of the bodies who were with us in the National Churches Trust Day yesterday have submitted formal responses. That's not the place of our centre, although many of our members and friends have responded as individuals to that survey. And I think there's been a very powerful response expressing the value of that scheme, and also the huge disappointment that its reduction and the threat of withdrawal is posing to the kind of resilience we've absolutely just seen on the call. Small numbers of volunteers who've raised hundreds of thousands of pounds for their local places of worship, whose plans have now been put on hold or are under threat because there's another £100,000, or in cases of some of the churches that have hit the media, £1 million to find that have really impacted their plans. So there's an impact on morale, of course, but there's an impact on the wider heritage economy. So these historic places of worship sustain some of the most important heritage crafts in our country, and all of those craftsmen are lining up, ready and willing to do work on our churches. And of course, any delays or disappointments to funding means they have to change their plans too. So I think from the centre's role, we are a research centre at the university based in the history department. We're interested in seeing that bigger picture. And we work both on the ground and then with national partners such as Historic England and the National Churches Trust to think about how we can use our voice and our research and the evidence base to make the case powerfully.
In your document about who you are and the work of your organisation, you say that there is a risk that the understanding of Christian concepts and narratives is rapidly fading in society, and the closure of church buildings contributes to that. So just explain to us how church buildings are important with the maintenance of the faith, please.
Yes, of course. I think churches are a gateway to faith. That is their purpose. They've always been there with open doors, inviting people to discover more about their faith. I think, we've all observed that there's a changing pattern in religious education and perhaps in that wider knowledge of Christianity within our culture, within our education system. That doesn't mean to say there's not curiosity. And I think one of the opportunities of church buildings is that they are that open door to everyone, those of faith, but also those on the edges of faith, those of no faith, people who are curious about spirituality in a broader sense. And you don't need a membership card to go into a historic church. You just need to be invited in. And so I think one of the wonderful things that the National Churches Trust has done and Historic England's work has encouraged people to think more about what kind of welcome can we give people? How can we invite people in? How can we share that rich heritage with others? And by needing to explain a little bit more about faith, about the why we have a font, what it's for, what are those wall paintings all about, what's in the stained glass, actually it's a much more democratic way of opening up that rich cultural heritage of these aisles to the widest audiences possible. And that does often lead people to having incredibly powerful experiences in these places. I think we've just heard that from the two churches on the call as well, and they are soaked in faith. They're soaked in prayer. So people often find them incredibly powerful places just to be, to find respite and solace, alongside all the other wonderful things they do in terms of the social care that we've heard about from Carl and Lachlan.
Thank you. To wrap this up, I wonder if I could go to Mary Keeley and Hugh Powell-Davis, and then finally Philip, if that's all right with you. Mary and Hugh, you've got all these people on the call. What more can you ask of them? What further help do you need to secure your church building? Mary first.
It's a big question, isn't it? Well, I suppose we'd love more volunteers. We'd love the VAT question to be settled at least one way or another so that everybody knows And we just would like to reach out and make sure everybody knows about our church and grows to love it the way we do.
You know, going back a few years, there was 50-50 funding to be made available by Cadw in Wales, which is the correspondence of Historic England, really. Now it's very tight. It goes on castles and other buildings, not so much as we see on chapels in Wales, which are so much part of the landscape. So it's that support, and also the feeling, you know, I've had to learn everything myself. Our volunteers have had to clue themselves up with about everything. That support, really, to us, professional support, where we have to look for a conservation architect ourselves. We have to look at these reports. We need professional support. We are responsible for these very, very important buildings that we have very little, if at all, support professionally to do that.
That's a call to action. Thank you. Philip, could I ask you to reflect on the conversation that we've had and what cause for hope you find in it?
I do find cause for hope. I mean, to be honest, when you go out and on this call, meeting people like you and Mary and Sheila and hearing what they're doing, it's really inspiring. And that is a cause for hope, isn't it? That across, you know, what we've heard here is just two snapshots of a picture that you could find in literally thousands and thousands of communities across the country. You know, this is a country that is full of people of goodwill trying to do their best to look after their local communities. And the buildings are a symbol of that. So it's a fantastic cause for hope.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's contributed to the call this morning. I'm sure we will do this again. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you'll come on again. Actually, at 2:00 this afternoon, we have another briefing, if you're up for it, on the Pope and the King meeting in Rome, if you're up for that. The details are on our website. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining the call today. Thank you.